So today we're going to do another 5 tips or another 5 things that I wish I knew when I started painting watercolours. So the first one, which is a quick one, is how I create greys. And now Payne's grey or Jane's grey, or there's lots of different greys that you can paint, and some people use ivory black, which is fine, you know, whatever you want. Personally, what I like to do is I like to use some blue, French ultramarine, cobalt blue, experiment. Different blues will give you different types of greys, warmer or colder. And then I'll tend to use now a brown. Now here is I think that's a raw umber in this little palette that I'm using here. This is a little micro palette, but you can see from my Daniel Steele palette, if you use again a sort of French ultramarine and a burnt umber, you can get a slightly different. Well, that's actually gone quite blue, but yeah, a bluer grey. I'll add a bit more in there, a little bit more of that dark brown, which is the burnt umber. So yeah, you can get lots of different greys by mixing different combinations of browns and blues, and you can even add in, you know, some pink there to create a sort of shadow colour, which is quite similar to Daniel Smith's Moon Glow, which is a great sort of shadow colour. I'll put some of that in there. You can see that. There we go. Okay, so number 2 is greens. Now, greens in nature are rarely green, if that makes sense. Now here I'm using some of Daniel Smith's Sap Green, which is a beautiful colour. And that is good for a base, because then you can add in other colours, like, say for example, again, some blues. I'm just going to mix this on the paper so you can see, and that will darken a green, a sort of standard green that you can get. And also if you were to use some sort of quinacridone gold, that works quite nice in there. And finally I'm going to drop in a little bit of the Hansa yellow. And again, that will lighten up. This is just a sort of demonstration of wetting wet as well. There you go. So that when that dries, you can see the effect of that. But see, the other alternative is if you have a limited palette, obviously if you get yellow and mix blue into that. So I will create a yellow splob, or blob, or spot, or splob. It's up to you. Okay, and I will take some blue again, and this is French ultramarine, and sort of mix that in. And then you can obviously use burnt sienna, you know, any of those sort of browns. It's just, or a sort of raw umber, or anything you want in there. You can even put some quinacridone rose. So basically, if you're mixing your colours, your own greens, you're going to get a bit more probably variation. As you can see, this one is consistently very much a sap green. Now, the other way of doing greens for foliage and things like that, that's really effective, is building them up in layers. Now, I don't know, I don't want to do it necessarily here, because I don't want to be doing layers and drying, because it involves drying. So a hairdryer is the way to go. You do a layer, you use a hairdryer, do a layer. Now you can see here what I've got. This is an example of where I've got a yellow and a blue together, and they've just been layered up. And what it creates is green effectively, but you can see it's quite complex in this solid block of colour. So layering is a good way of creating more interest in your foliage. My next tip is using test scraps of paper when you're doing a big painting. So I'll try to sort of do a quick example, but effectively what I'm going to do is is a test painting of a test painting. So I'll try and show you a sort of rough example of what I mean. So say for example you were doing I'm going to do a simple sort of line and wash drawing here of a scene with a lighthouse and a sort of rocky promontory of a beach with a little boat sort of at anchor there. So if I'm going to paint that and I start with, I don't know, some water in a sky up here, and I'm going to put the sky in first, which is what I'm doing most of the time. Oh look, that ink's not dried and it's bleeding. Bleeding ink. Anyway, c'est la vie. So there's my sky, and I think, right, if I have blue in my sky like that, what do I mix with it? So instead of mixing it on the palette, what you can do is you can have a test scrap of paper and drop that in and go, oh, that's quite interesting. Do I like that? Oh, I don't think that looks exactly what I want. So maybe I'll try a little bit of this. Oh no, that's really not what I want. What about a little bit of this? Oh yeah, that's what I want. Okay, so you know then, you're just having a play and you think, oh, I just want a little bit of that in there. So by having some scrap pieces of paper alongside a drawing means that you can have somewhere to go to have a little bit of an experiment and a play. And the other thing is always have some tissues at hand, because you never know when you need to go, that's not worked, I need to start again. And then it's a lot easier than you think. So the next one is be gestural. What I mean by that is sometimes if you're painting something, we'll go back to this one as an example. Sometimes if you're painting something, you can be very careful about how your drawing looks. And what that means, you end up defaulting to accuracy. So say here, for example, if you wanted to draw a sky, we'll go back to this one that I did earlier, and put a bit of blue on there, you might be a little bit like, oh well, there's blue there, and then there's some white cloud up here, and then there's another cloud sort of there, and I want it to go up to there, so I'll colour that in, and that's fine. You know, that's sometimes if you're doing foliage and things, or just putting dots of colouring, it needs to be accurate. But other times you don't really need to do that. I mean, say for example, if the lighthouse value is going to be darker than the sky, you can literally just, I'm going to just chuck some colour in. I mean, you can be as messy as you want. Let's make the sky big. Let's make the sky come right up here. And then we'll just do that. And you can even go in and put in some really big, bold colours. I'm playing again. This is the value of play, always. So I'm going to bring the horizon down because that is a line that we want. Now, once that's dry, you can go back in and put some layers over the top, define some details, put some highlights in with some white pen or some white out, and you can go in and put another layer of colour on to start defining these areas in the foreground. But even with those, you don't have to be doing fiddly little bits of paint. You can do broad brushes. Somebody once said that the bigger the brush, the better, but I'm not sure about that. I think every brush is different. But personally for me, gestural painting, in other words, you know, being quite free and is actually more expressive than fiddly, small patches of colour. It's just my preference. I'm looking at all this, it feels hilarious to say this, but don't overpaint. And I don't mean actually putting layers and layers and layers of paint on, because that is a common mistake people make, and a painting can end up looking cakey and a little bit mushy. So say for example, this was a picture that I did earlier as a demonstration, and if I wanted to go and put another layer on this, I certainly could go in and put in some details, but once you've done sort of 2 or 3 layers, you probably wouldn't want to necessarily put any more in, because it starts to kill the sort of fluid expressiveness of the piece almost. So anyway, there you go. Now the other thing about overpainting is, when I say overpainting, is you don't actually have to paint every part of the picture. One of my favourite techniques is, if anybody who follows me on Instagram will see that it's sort of like selective colouring, where... Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flash up on screen some examples now of some of my artwork, and you'll see that some areas are coloured, some areas aren't. It's a personal preference thing, but you can play. You can actually have a play with that and really see what works for you. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you soon. And don't forget to subscribe and like. I'm nearly at 1,000 subscriptions, so that would be great if I could cross that Rubicon, and I could get some free beers out of my ad revenue. Okay, thanks so much. See you soon. Bye.